All right, everyone, welcome to the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a compensatory counter-racist code, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and or action for victims of racism, white supremacy. We're covering pages 79 through 99. Um, so my question to everyone to get us started is since reading this portion and discovering area one of economics, have we attempted to refine or improve our usage of our time and energy? If so, what has changed? Like, what were you doing, and now what are you doing? If anyone wants to start.
I can start. After reading this area of PB activity, I would say that I, s- I would say now that I'm studying more, and when I mean studying, that's me either reading books, articles, watching things and that sort in a lens of producing justice and figuring out ways and just reading the words and trying to understand with whoever wrote whatever piece what they're saying and also applying it logically and seeing how that piece of work or whatever is producing justice or not. So that is the I would say rabbit hole I'm going down, but that is where I am in now. And some other areas too is just like um, when I am quote unquote relaxing or rejuvenating myself, I'm also doing other things that can be relaxing, like folding laundry, things like that, instead of just sitting there. So that is just really just being concise or refining, I would say, my constructive tendencies. And especially when it comes to studying, like I just need to know. But yeah, so thank you.
Well said. For me, so many things. For the for money, I used to be pretty frivolous with my money. I think I didn't do a lot of spending with it, but I didn't like invest with it or use it wisely like I can. So that's something I'm improving on. And just by my overall usage of time and energy, before the code book, I kind of was just floating through my days. I really when I woke up, maybe would work out. But other than that, I didn't really have any like particular plans, especially when COVID started. I was just really floating and just not doing much of anything with my time besides bettering my StarCraft skills, which is a video game. So now, since discovering the area of economics, I'm much more intentional and constructive with my time. I'm either reading or listening to lectures or working on CRWS stuff, content, or attempting to recruit or attempting to get more victims involved and attempting to solve the problem. So we can solve the problem in my lifetime, our lifetime. Um, because I believe all the knowledge that we need to solve it is definitely here on planet Earth already. But does anyone want to answer the question?
I feel like since I've read the passage, most of everything is the same except I observe around me a little bit more. It's the more I read anything I observe around me. One of the main things that I've noticed, and I mean since we've been reading this and the other book, is how towns are so segregated. Like if I go to the city part of town, like where apartments are, I'll see more non-white people. And then if I go to the houses, I'll see more white people. And I never realized how uncommon it was to see a non-white person living in an actual house that was made, say, in the past 20 years, maybe, or that's in good condition. But it's definitely something that I've noticed since the reading around me is just how non-white people are treated in general on a higher level of just why do we have this group of people or this group of children playing here where there's more factories, there's smog, that kind of stuff, and the white people living where as far away from that as they can. They're turning a blind eye. So that's something that I've noticed since, and I just pay attention to my surroundings more because I realize how big of a problem it is. And if I don't pay attention, it can be an even bigger problem. That's it for me.
I think for me personally, like the more I'm reading, the work, like I feel like I'm getting worse and being less constructive with my time, unfortunately, like my time and energy. I'm not sure what it is, if it's just like being more aware is like causing my brain to just want to like just be brain trash and just want to not do the things that I probably should be doing, even though I know that, like, yeah, it's hard to explain, but I haven't like I feel like a lot of the stuff about being mindful about things that you purchase, I have not been really adhering to, and like being kind of just more careful with like how I spend my time. I don't think that I've done as great a job as I could have. And I think so from reading it, I've probably been doing worse, to be honest.
Sarah, Dan, would you guys like to answer?
Can you state the question one more time?
Mm-hmm. It's since have you refined your usage of your time and energy since discovering this portion of the code book, or since
Okay.
this portion of the code book?
Okay. Just want to try to make sure I stay on topic. As far as this section that we read, 79 through 99, the rest of economics, I would say while reading over this portion, especially like once I got to the part on residential arrangements, I was thinking a lot about like this whole COVID thing, just how a lot of non-white, especially Black people, got dislocated, and they're still being dislocated as long as this thing goes on. And I also thought about like my own, personal situation, like having to search for a, prison cell throughout the pandemic. And I was like thinking back to that time, like I would go into the counter racism role play, like just try and run the scenario in my head. I was like, this is how the racist suspects, they see it, or the usual suspect. They're like, this this Negro, he's searching for an apartment in the middle of a pandemic. He doesn't have no support system. We're gonna railroad him. And that's what I was thinking when I was looking at the residential arrangements part, and then also the Black culture part. I was thinking about too, since it's February while we're reading that, about how we definitely need to spend our time more constructively. And hopefully that answers the question, because I don't want to go too much like off topic on the economics, because we might cover some more of it, but hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. Anyone else like to answer the question before we continue? I thought this part was really important because I believe this. I believe a lot of victims of white supremacy understood this, then there will be a lot less jealousy and envy amongst each other, especially Black people. And this is from page 77. And it says, do not be confused when and if white people who are racist suspects, suspected white supremacists allow some or many non-white people to acquire comfort, convenience, and or large amounts of money. White supremacists, racist men and racist women collectively function as racist royalty, while functioning as racist royalty. Many white supremacists sometimes choose to present their subjects, non-white people, with the comfort, convenience, and groom care that they sometimes give their favorite pets or their favorite creatures of entertainment. So this allows me to understand that when I was more confused, um I never really like I learned how to not compare myself to people a long time ago and how to not be materialistic a long time ago. But I would still think about all these so-called celebrities, um, racially showcased people. I always think, these people have a lot of money. If they really wanted to, they could like help some Black people. But as I became more informed about what's happening on planet Earth, I now realize, oh, like, racist man and racist woman, they know how to like pick people, or they know how to they control everything. So even if these Black people wanted to do stuff with their money, they are prevented from doing stuff with their money to help Black people. I think sometimes it's really in their contract that you can't help Black people, or you can't write positive stuff about Black people in your music. So I'm like, wow, the racist man, racist woman really do control everything. I really do like pick and choose who's gonna have like the, the big house and all the cars and all that, all those trinkets and whatnot. Does anyone have any thoughts around that, or anything they have highlighted that they wanted to share on?
Yeah, I have quite a bit that didn't really exactly answer your question before, so I was holding off. But
Oh, five.
just this chapter, um, half being a lot of this, some of this chapter I loved and I thought was like very like it, I thought was text that like I would come back to, like I could reread every day, and I think it's important, like in the summary about when it talks about death or possessions, and even what you were just describing, like jealousy, stuff like that, and simplifying your life and memories, like all of that, I super strongly agree with. But there were some other things that I just worry are too and I look forward to hearing other people's thoughts on them. But I just like don't fundamentally agree with them. Like not calling your kid your child or your son or daughter or like things like that I think is like I know I'm just like picking, but I'm just like, I don't know what the like spiritual impacts of kind of distancing yourself from your family members are. And then like, yeah, I don't know if anyone has like thought. It just seems a bit like robotic to me. And I understand like the whole critique of like, if the culture hasn't liberated us in the past, then maybe it's not productive culture. But I feel like, I don't know, that's like, I don't think I agree with that. Like I can understand how a lot of maybe aspects of culture that are promoted are like to distract people from doing more, but I feel like we can't dismiss all of non-white culture so far. Like a lot of it is restorative and spiritual and like healing. So yeah, if anyone has disagreements on that or like want to talk about it, I appreciate it.
Uh,
Excuse my dog.
Mr. Williams, you have an offspring. Can you comment on if you do call your offspring, can you comment on if that has diminished spiritual relationship between you and your offspring? If that's what is that something along the lines of what you're implying, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's a bit bizarre
I'm sorry, what's bizarre?
to call like a child your like exclusively call them your offspring to their face.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a choice that you can make,
Yeah, and so I understand, and what I respect from Mr. Fuller at the beginning, he's like, just take what what you want. You don't have to take everything in the book. And so that was just something to me that I'm like, one of those things that I feel like is so black and white that I'm like, I don't think I will actually use this, but other parts of the chapter I really appreciate.
Yeah. So. But it has a certain amount of logic to it, right?
Yeah,
because
I mean,
if the white people who practice racism, white supremacy, control you, meaning that they own you because they control you, then they own and control everything that you have, including, your son or your daughter or whatever it is that you decide to call them. So it's, every time you use that word offspring, it's you acknowledging that, yeah, I'm really not in control of this. Now, I do have a responsibility, however, to make sure that my child or my offspring or my son or my daughter, whatever you decide to call them, I have a responsibility to make sure that they understand what is true and that they can recognize what is true. But when it comes to control, you have very little control. So it's like constantly taking that red pill. A lot of people are not going to want to do that. So I call my daughter. I call her my offspring. I call her a lot of things. Nothing. Non-constructive, but I have a lot of names that I call her, and she has a lot of names that she calls me. Nothing non-constructive, but offspring is one of them. And so it's really difficult for people who are just coming into counter-racism code, and for people who've been exposed to it for long periods of time, to keep that, keep telling themselves the truth. That's the hardest part about the whole thing, is to keep telling yourself the truth. And a lot of the counter-racist language is designed for you to do just that.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I think also words are definitely tools, and I just want to read this before I make my comment. This is from 82, and the code says, avoid producing offspring until you can, with an absolute minimum amount of help from others, adequately feed, clothe, and shelter them. Teach them to provide constructive care for themselves with little help from others, and teach them what white supremacy, racism is, how it works, and how to counteract its effects in all areas of activity. Yeah, in my experience, I haven't met a lot of non-white so-called parents who have done this, or who can meet at least two out of these three things. Because it's important to also feed your offspring food that's not gonna get them addicted to salt, sugar, or kill them in the long run. which a lot of non-white people are trained to not have any knowledge about, because that's how the system of white supremacy works. So that's why I think this is a really good tool to use as a word, calling children offspring, because you can ask these questions to a person who's calling their their child, if given opportunity, if you want to go that route. Any more comments about this or any other?
I
I
think.
have. You can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Short. One of the things that I noticed is that a lot of people, white and non-white people, but disturbingly non-white people, have last names of their slave owners, and a lot of people don't really think about that. They'll, say their last name proudly or have it tatted on them, but it isn't like isn't necessarily something to be proud of that you're owned by somebody else. So that's just something I thought about with the whole offspring conversation. Is a lot of people attach names that if they really thought about where the names came from, they wouldn't be wanting to call their children those names either.
Oh, one thing I'd like to add, or a thought I had on with offspring, in which they're not your offspring, is that like the usual suspects, they can, take your child from you, not like physically, but they can mentally take them from you. Once the racist suspects, their thoughts, into your child's mind, then they can, I guess, mentally capture them, if I'm making sense. In like regards to like area 8, you can end up with like a black male son that's like a wife to a white man, and your so-called generational wealth will be transferred back over to the usual suspects, and which you thought you were going to be able to, pass down your stuff to your son, if I'm making sense with that thought.
Kind of like brainwashing through the channels, the television, the phone, those types of things, to basically program your children in the wrong direction, right? That's what I got out of it.
Kind of like that. I definitely say one thing in regards to like economics, time, and energy that I struggle with is trying to communicate these thoughts, because they've done a good job on us on communication deficiencies, I would say.
Well said. Definitely agree. I think I want to give a really just great example of this offspring situation, and just how powerful racist men and racist women are. Because I have someone in my Victor unit who, due to the social engineering of white supremacy and what it has done to the area of the world we used to live in, she had a offspring who was born with poison in their system. So the state was allowed, well, white people were allowed to take care of her children. So that's when white people are so powerful, they create the situations and then they take your babies, well, your offspring. So mothers really don't exist if you're non-white, because you need to be able to protect and navigate these systems correctly and replace these systems. But until we can do that, then I don't I don't think it's logical to have children, small victims, thinking that they have fathers and mothers who could protect them from this wicked system. Like, only I think the only person worthy of calling themselves a mother or father is someone who's teaching their children the truth of what's happening on planet Earth and who are doing it. But I could be incorrect.
I agree. It's silent.
I'm definitely glad that we talked about children and offspring, because it definitely gives me another way to think about it, and just to see. And I love how Sarah brought to the point, you can it's an independent walk, so you can choose like what resonates and what doesn't, and just logically, right, what makes sense in producing justice. So I love that. Although I don't have any offsprings right now, I do plan in the future if that is for me too. But I can't say as of right now if that's something I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna call my child an offspring, or my offspring a child, whichever. But it's definitely interesting to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I have an offspring. I call her my daughter, but like when I say myself, I usually say I'm an attempted parent, because I don't think that like what Dan was saying, like your kid is really like mentally and physically can be taken from you like literally at any moment, and mentally they are not fully present in terms of like they're always under propaganda, and I feel like kids are under it to a greater extent than adult or like people who be classified as adults, because their like minds are still being molded, whereas we're pretty like propagandized already. um I think it is like, I don't think that it, yeah, I mean, to me it doesn't necessarily sound bizarre, it kind of makes sense, to be honest. As someone who is like who has a kid, I've never felt like fully like my child was like mine, because when she was in school, I would always have to help her unlearn what she would learn in school, and she's forced to be in school by law. And then when she's around my, survival unit, my like I have to help her unlearn whatever she learns there, because a lot of the people in my survival unit are very lost and perpetuate a lot of like, just, I don't know, a lot of things that are not going to help her to understand the world. And so I do constantly feel like I'm always like having to like, I don't know, like I don't feel like as a parent I'm in any sort of control. And that, not to say that you have to control your kid, but I mean, like, you would want them to be exposed to certain customs and ideals and, like rituals that are specific to you and your culture. And when Black people's culture is really like diminished, it's really hard to say that I'm really passing on anything to my child. I don't know if that made sense fully, but yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
That did make sense. Thank you, Ash. And yeah, like totally very complex situation. And I imagine that it's like also different to raise a child, even though all of the entire world is under the control of white supremacy. I still think it would be different to raise a non-white kid in the U.S. versus like in in another country that is non-white primarily. So That is interesting.
How would it be different if they're both under the global system of white supremacy?
Maybe, I mean, I feel like maybe I hope, even though it's be under the global system of white supremacy, I feel like non-white cultures would be more like prevalent or stronger. But I don't know, like I haven't thought about it deeply, but it just feels like it would be a different experience for a kid, like in the public school system and everything.
One of the things that I think about, that was a great point that was brought up right now, is like, how would it be different? But one of the things I think about, not to get off topic or anything, is that looking here, like living in like the United States, can be slightly different than living somewhere in like a country in Africa, right? I wouldn't say like, I wouldn't use a country like Ghana or a place where there's like access to technology as much, but I know obviously white supremacy is everywhere, but I think like if we're talking about parenting, and although they do go to those schools, but as Ash said, it's like she still has to, not only with schools, but with other people in society that her child would interact with, she still has to teach her to like unlearn those ideas, like, oh, that's not right, or whatever it is, like, hey, I still have to do this. So I think like even you might have a little bit more control in different countries. I'm not entirely sure because obviously I live here, but that's just one of my thoughts that just came up. It's like maybe you'll have a little bit more control and you won't really like, you'll play outside more rather than like being your house at the child on your phone all day on TikTok. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's like a tricky question because it's like it's honestly kind of like the same but different perspectives. Like let's say like if your child goes to an African school, like if your child lives in Ghana and they go to school, like it's gonna be, you're gonna have to help them unlearn all of the Christianity and like corporal punishment that they have like been forced to undergo there, which like they're not necessarily learning in American schools, but they're learning different versions of it, if that makes sense. And like I agree with Ray, like in another country, like in Ghana, for example, your child would have more free, your offspring would have more freedom to maneuver around. And you're not like, I mean, I do think that like being in America, you are kind of like in the belly of the beast of white supremacy. Not to say that like you're just around more white people consistently, and obviously the Black people in Ghana are controlled by the white people, but it's a different dynamic having to ask a Black person for something than a white person, if that makes sense. Like, yeah.
If no one has anything else to add or to say, thank you, Ash. That was what I was trying to say, is like just the degree of things. But also, I have some comments on page 84 with residential arrangements. Okay. One of the things that stood out as I was reading the rest of this area is residential arrangements. And I always wondered, like, everyone has like this one room, they call it the guest room. And but from my experience and from what I've seen through my eyes, is that people have these guest rooms, sometimes multiple guest rooms, but they're not being used of constructive value. Like if someone's in need that they know, they won't lend it to them. They won't like say, oh, come live here or whatever, but it's more of just like a showroom, if that makes any sense, of like, oh, I have all of these rooms and maybe one day I'll have a guest, even though I don't like people. But it's just very interesting that these things are there. So this has definitely changed my idea of a guest room, if you will, quote unquote, or an extra space. Because I've always wanted an extra space, especially if I do have guests, they can come and stay the night. Yes. Only reserved for visiting families, yes. So it's just very interesting. I really like how this was broken down and for me to understand, like, hey, this can be used for constructive use only, you know. When they say constructive use, that means the person in the room, you know, is actively trying to be constructive as well, and not just, you know, being unconstructive in your place of constructiveness, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I completely agree, Ray. Like that part resonated with me so much. And I even wrote that like that non-white people, you know, have this, like they have these spaces and they do not like use them, and rather would have like family on the street or just people that they know on the street and like can, and I just thought that that was another sign of just how, you know, non-white people are just really brain trash into white supremacy, because it's like even people like, I come from an immigrant family, so I come from a household like back where I'm from, where you would have like 10 people living in a home. It doesn't feel crowded or anything like that. Whoever needs a space is going to live there. To like my family moving here and having multiple rooms that are just empty, and knowing people who would need them, but just not reserving that right, you know, because they want whatever so-called privacy, or they won't do it unless they profit from it. And it just shows you how like how much you can just be indoctrinated to like do what white people do, but for you it's not beneficial because like the Black community needs that support and you're not providing that, and it's very, very sad to see.
Yeah, that goes back to um culture. I want to comment because I heard earlier a lot of people mention culture. I want to read this from the word guide just so we all have a we all can at least know the codified definition of culture if we choose to use it. This is from 83 of the word guide. Culture. Use this word to mean that which is done. When others use this word, ask for a detailed explanation that you can easily understand. Note, whatever a person done is the culture of that person at the time he or she is doing it. Whatever it is, whatever it is that he or she is doing. All right. And from the code book on 91, there's a question here that I think is very important because I personally haven't seen or been exposed to a culture that that is worth preserving. But I'm just gonna read it. This is from 91, and it says, "Question: What is the correct thing to say when someone talks about preserving so-called Black culture or so-called white culture? Answer: Say any so-called culture that has not replaced white supremacy with justice is not worth preserving. Note, a culture is nothing other than a combination of whatever it is that people think, say, and do in all of their interactions with each other, with all creatures and with all things in all areas of activity. The most powerful, most sophisticated, and most accomplished culture in the known universe is white supremacy racism. Question: During the existence of white supremacy, what is the best and correct way to describe so-called Black culture? Answer: pitiful, primitive, stupid, and or silly. Question: What part or parts of so-called Black culture should all the people of the known universe seek to copy? Answer: Whatever is not pitiful, primitive, stupid, and or silly. So this is not just entirely throwing out all of so-called Black culture, but it's looking at it logically and allowing us to understand that a lot of so-called culture that is thrown around and that is celebrated is not worth being celebrated while there's a war being waged against non-white people. That makes logical sense. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Black culture seems to be a huge issue. At least the white supremacists has made it a huge issue amongst, non-white people. I mean, Black people. I see a lot of people trying to hold on to Black culture and, preserve it, when logically it provides no constructive value to anybody. I mean, when we talk about what is Black culture, you might say the food and the behaviors, etc. None of it is of any real constructive value to us. So why do we see so many people trying to preserve it or hold on to it? Why don't we see more Black people trying to get rid of it? Because of the system of racism and white supremacy. I would, I don't know what would you be called, what is primitive about Black culture? Somebody could answer that for me. I mean, maybe I would need the definition of primitive.
Well, it's just a prime state, a beginning state. And I know a lot of people say, well, Black people, the oldest people on the planet, we were here first, blah, blah, blah. And we've done a lot of, exciting, fantastic, and educational things during our time on the planet. But if you look at us now, I mean, we're not doing any of those things. And based on the definition that was given for the word culture, it's whatever people are doing at the time that they're doing it. So we're not doing anything advanced right now. I mean, if we are, please tell me some of those things, because I could be overlooking them. And we're in the beginning stages, the prime stages, the primitive stages of doing something. I think one of the things that the code points out is that when we begin to do something, that what we should be doing is replacing white supremacy with justice. The culture is just, according to the definition, it's whatever you're doing at the time that you're doing it. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. This is the reason that psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists, when they go to study the culture of a person or a people, the only thing that they look at is what that person or what those people were doing at the time they were doing it. That's all they're looking at. Were those people building pyramids? Were those people making clay pots? And when were they making those clay pots? When did they switch to making brass pots instead of clay pots? So it's not as intellectually diverse as some people would have you believe that it is. It's only what the people are doing at the time that they were doing it. Right now, Black people are not doing very much other than consuming. I was talking to some people in Namibia not long ago, and they were talking about, although they have the ability to grow their own food, most of their food is shipped in from somewhere else. They're not even growing it. And so the farmers are, there's an uptick in the protesting from the farmers because of that. Talking to people in Nigeria about even though they have one of the largest oil deposits on the planet, they don't buy and sell their own oil to each other or to other African countries. White people come in and take control of that. And they sell it to whomever they want to sell it to. So it's not just here, it's everywhere. We have to be, we have to recognize that. We have to acknowledge that. And we have to be cognizant of it when we're throwing that word around.
Agreed.
I think so that, but like, I feel like what a country does with their resources or technology is only one aspect of the culture. Like, I would say if an anthropologist is viewing what people do at that time, a lot of it also has to do with the fact that like anthropologists are, like white supremacists. And so that's what they do, is just to watch someone and then to say, this is what they are based on my ideas of what people are. But I think that there's like deeper, like, I don't know if you guys saw what I posted in the chat, but culture, like that cultural iceberg, it shows that like culture also has to do with like ways that we interact, ways that we view our elders, things like that, our spirituality, etc. And so I mean, I'm not saying that I don't agree, but I think that it's just like I think that there might be more to so-called culture than just like what is produced at the time.
So imagine that you're an alien, from another galaxy somewhere, and you're here now on this planet with the sole purpose of studying Black people. And you have to take notes and take that back to your galaxy and tell yourself the truth about what it is that you see, because you're an alien. You're not a Black person. So what notes are you going to take about what the people are doing at the time that they're doing in reference to Black people? What is it that you're writing down to take back to your planet?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, is that those aliens are always going to have an incomplete picture. It's just like a baby, right? A baby is born into whatever group of people that they're born into, and they pick up on so many codes and frequencies without even like, just because they're immersed in that space their whole life. It's like when a fish is in water, it's not going to call water something that it is. Like, it's not going to say water is a something. Like, if someone says to the fish, observe around you, the fish isn't going to say water because it's immersed in the water. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that like an outsider is never really going to know the culture because it's deeper than just what they see, if that makes sense. And so that's all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say like Black people have a culture, Black people don't have a culture. Like, I agree with generally what like Neely Fuller is saying. I'm just saying that I don't think culture is just based on the technological output.
So I have a question.
Oh,
Um, and I want to read this part before I ask the question. And it says on page 90, do not brag about, celebrate, or try to produce the so-called Black culture, either as it was in the past or as it is now. Instead, produce and or enact a compensatory counter-racist culture. Do this by thinking, speaking, and acting according to selections from a compensatory counter-racist code of thought, speech, and action that is specifically designed to end the system of white supremacy, racism, and help produce justice. According to compensatory logic, culture is whatever is done, and the effect of whatever is done. If you do your culture as a victim of white supremacy, wait, hold on. If what you do your culture as a victim of white supremacy does not result in the end of white supremacy and or does not result in the establishment of justice, balance between people, there is reason to believe that your culture, what you do, is worthless. Explanation: ancient black culture proved to be inadequate in preventing the establishment of white supremacy racism. Two, modern black culture has so far proven to be none other than pitiful, primitive, stupid, silly, tacky, trashy, and or terroristic reaction to white supremacy racism. So the question is there any black or non-white culture that we should celebrate? Does anyone know of any?
Off the top of my head, given this definition, according to compensatory logic, no, because white supremacy exists. So I don't think there's anything, worth celebrating. You can still, doesn't mean you can't celebrate it, but why are you celebrating it? You're a prisoner of war.
Agreed. That's my answer too. I don't think there's any.
I wanted to also add on the ancient black culture, when he said ancient black culture proved to be inadequate. I like that part because I feel it's important to, study history. And he also mentions it later on in the book on the next page, on page 92, about history, understand what mistakes were made, how the mistakes were made, how not to make the same mistakes, what to do now to compensate for the mistakes and the result of the mistakes. And we go on and on about how ancient civilization, ancient black civilization was so great, but white supremacy is still here. So I feel that in order, not to make those same mistakes again, we need to study, ancient black history, so we know what they were doing wrong, and correct them. And I think that would go for a long way in establishing justice.
Yeah, that's what we're learning in Destruction of Black Civilization, how ancient black culture attempted, but in the end failed to prevent the system from being established.
I find people find it very hard, black people find it very hard, when you tell them, that ancient, black ancient civilization, it doesn't really mean anything, or it's not worth talking about because white supremacy is here. I feel black people tend to hold on to that because that's maybe the only memory they have of themselves when they were great. So.
I think it's important to talk about Black history, and I do agree about the saying greatness and things like that. But I think it's very important to research and talk about Black history, or not Black history, African history, or non-white people history in general, because you can find some constructive value um, with is what's going on now, especially when we're talking about what are the mistakes they have made. We wouldn't know that if we didn't study it, or we didn't talk about it, or we didn't look back at it. But I definitely feel yeah, in the eyes of celebration, yeah, that I think it's only important to look back if it with constructive lenses.
So there was a time, I imagine, that the system of racism, white supremacy did not exist. Can everybody agree to that?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
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 And
Yes.
Although, according to the definition of justice in the code, I don't know if a system of justice existed, but there was a time before the system of racism, white supremacy existed. So when the white supremacists came among the people in Africa and other places of the world, the white supremacists took control of them. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That's the reason it's still here today. They figured out, and you guys are reading Destruction of Black Civilization, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And it has it's been a long time since I read that book, like 25 years, but there's some examples of how that was done in that book. And they studied Black people, all of the different customs and all different things that Black people were doing in their interaction with each other so that they could take control of those Black people. There's a story about the people in Algeria. I don't know if you ever heard it, which is in Africa, by the way, Algeria. When the French came among them and began to study them, and how it is that they took control of the people there. They, according to the story, they did it by the wearing of the veil, because they wanted to take over Algeria without killing the people off. They wanted to keep the people because the people were productive. So they said, well, how will we do it? Yeah, well, we'll go to the wearing of the veil. And said to talk about the people who were wearing the veils, over their faces, make fun of them, laugh at them. And said, if you can get that woman to remove her veil in public, then you would have disrupted the relationship between the man and the woman. And once you have done that, then they are weaker as a team, as a unit, and you can take over Algeria without firing a single shot. And this is just one of the ways that they did it. So I agree in reference to the studying of things that have happened in the past with the objective of not making the same mistakes. But you don't want to study it and study it and study it and keep studying it and wind up on your deathbed at 98 years old, having only done that, studying it. You also have to use what you've studied, use what you've learned, according to the code, to replace white supremacy with justice.
Wow, Edward, thanks for that. I think this part from the code 81 is a perfect perfect thing to read that reflects what you said about what happened in Algeria. I didn't even know that was in Africa either. Wow. Um, from 81, the code says when talking about ownership and our possessions as pertains to people, say the following: whoever possesses you also possesses all that you possess. Explanation: as long as white supremacy and racism exists, is according to compensatory counter-racist logic, the non-white people of the known universe are dominated and controlled by racist men and racist women, white supremacists collectively. Therefore, all of the things that the non-white people of the known universe claim that they own are in truth dominated and controlled by racist men and racist women. And this is proof by what Mr. Williams mentioned earlier about Nigeria having all that oil over there, but them controlling 0% of where it goes. Besides them being the ones who are probably like doing some harsh manual labor to help get it out the ground. Yeah, this is system we're under.
On page 83, I had highlighted, or not highlighted, but where he was talking about, going to white people and asking for what's needed. This is back on Oscar. I know we passed this, but I found it interesting that he said to first ask the white supremacists, then seek it from the creator and through themselves. I thought that was very interesting. I mean, it's true. The reality of it is that, the white supremacists the white supremacist controls all resources. So any kind of materials that you need, they have it. But it's it's very like opposite of what we see today, where, the first thing, anytime Black people start to experience a tragedy or when they need something, they start praying. Yeah, so I thought that was very interesting.
Yep, and in the system of white supremacy, they're usually praying to a white god, unfortunately.
Definitely, and it's praying to white people. Like, to just stop that and just go ask them. They're right there. Yeah.
Wow. Anyone have anything to share from what they read?
Yeah, one of the points that stood out to me was on page 86. It talked about a place like where you reside. And I thought it was very interesting of the 7 answers that were given. I'm going to read them really briefly, but it was very interesting that it says, make the place as clean and as constructively orderly as you can, improve the use of space, of color, of light, and of darkness, place things in position that will be of the most constructive use, make maximum constructive use of everything in your possession, bring nothing into the place of residence that does not serve a needed constructive purpose, plan a defense against intrusion, theft, damage, and of destruction, try to produce or operate a constructive activity in the place that will help you be reliant reliant, as well as help you to be of constructive service to others. And I thought this stood out to me because it was just like, it's kind of, I don't want to use the word respect, but it gives you some grounds or some guidelines of like how to keep your place. You don't want to just do whatever in your home, especially to counter racism or counter white supremacy. It's important what you do in your home, because you can't just, I always say, like, you can't just go outside and talk about it all day. You have to show some type of like standard within yourself as well.
I agree. Thanks for highlighting that part. I think it's important to do a lot of these things. How can you be constructive how can you be most constructive, efficiently constructive in a place that is unorganized, which can also be classified as dirty? How can you use things if they're not in a constructive position? For instance, me personally, we've had a TV, not using it, but it's just in the way on the floor, not being used. That's something that, that's a hazard. It doesn't allow us to be constructive because every time I look at it, it makes me feel some type of way. That's just something right there. Bring nothing into the place of residence that does not serve a needed constructive purpose. Another good one. Maybe I don't know, a number of things can fall under that. I also like how Ray mentioned, kind of making it like a standard almost, so that something that we can all like practice amongst each other. I think it would also go a long way to even minimizing conflict between ourselves. Just my thoughts.
That was a great point to bring up, Kwaku. But one of the only things I want to mention as well is that I think it should be an individual standard and not like a collective standard. And the only reason why I say that, because when you are operating or interacting with other victims, their standard is completely different, whether they read this chapter or not, or this page. And they may say like, oh, this serves constructive value to them, which is important because that is valid, like it may serve constructive value to someone else and not to another person. But I think definitely in spaces where you share things, there needs to come to a common like consensus on certain things too. So I think it's just something to think about.
Yes, very, very great point. Thank you.
Oh, I'd like to add one thing too. On the section that was just mentioned, on 86, underneath that answer part, it talks about studying ways to start a quote unquote business in your residence. I think that's also related to economics, what we're covering. It's like try and make a constructive use of your the place you're allowed to stay in. Because it says in bold, study ways that you can start a business of gainful constructive employment for yourself in which you can make use of the place where you reside without disturbing others, house, apartment, cabin, hut, boat, etc. Make a list of all of the types of businesses that you think you can start at your place of residence and choose what you think you can do best. And I think that's one thing I've kind of struggled with underneath this system, is trying to come up with a business idea in the area of economics that's somewhat constructive, because a lot of Black people that are involved in starting their own businesses, it's usually something that's not constructive is what makes them a lot of money. And that's all I have to add for right now.
Yes, Dan, great point. I did. That was also another, big thing that I took away from this was, using your area of like where you reside as a business. I don't know if I've ever really thought of using where I live, where I reside as, turning it into a business. I definitely have had business ideas in the past that have failed for numerous reasons, but I definitely enjoyed this, and it kind of gave me some clarity and I guess some direction on how I should also how I can use my space more constructively.
Yeah, I really appreciate the idea presented and making your dwelling, your base of operations, and attempting to have your home just being a constructive space where you're trying to produce justice and everything that you do, which would be which would be like the true reality maker where Black people and non-white people need, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
I'll go for it.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say like something. I was thinking about how that's like such a good idea as well. The only thing I was thinking that I was worried about is that people have it in their lease. You know, if you're like renting from a place, like you cannot like they'll find ways to like take the money that you do your business at home from if they find out that like you're mailing stuff from your home or you have some sort of like at home business. So I feel like it's just another like tool of like refinement too, because I do think a lot of people have been trying that and then that's something that happens.
That's an important resource right there. I didn't know that, you know, the white supremacist was doing that, but I should, you know, that right there caught me slipping again, would have caught me slipping again. So I'm gonna have to, you know, read over that lease. So not to fall in, yeah, you know what I mean.
I also really I like this logic here from 95 because a lot of people I'm positive, a lot of victims as well, I'm positive will see this type of work we're trying to do here and may assume that, wow, these people must hate white people. These people must have a lot of anger and hate in their hearts. But me personally, I don't hate white people. I um I just really am aware of what they have done to the planet, and sometimes I'm very disgusted by it. But mostly, I'm just attempting to understand it and just saddened by it because the potential could be so much more than what it is right now. So I don't hate white people. I despise the system that they have devised on occasion, though. But from page 95, it says when thinking about or talking about hate, also think about and or make one or more of the following statements. Hatred of people, creatures, and or things is non-just and incorrect. It is not correct to hate. It is correct to correct that which needs correcting. People who hate other people may also hate themselves. People who hate other people may become like the people they hate. Hatred of any people is not economical in regards to the production of justice, balance between people. Seek to have all white persons who have the same last name. Oh, this is not related, but that's also a good point. Um, but yeah, I really appreciate this part about the hate. I think this is what a lot of I wish a lot of victims will get this into their brain computers because I'm certain a lot of people react to racism by hating white people. Sometimes, I'm sure. Um, I fortunately have not been one to gravitate that way, to gravitate towards that. But yeah.
I find this to be a very important section in this book, only because I do agree with you, O5. When you talk about white supremacy, it's like this automatic you hate white people. And I think it's just because it's not clear when you are talking, because sometimes not you particular, but in general, when we are talking and we're like, oh, white supremacists, racist men, racist women did X, Y, and Z, or is doing X, Y, and Z, or has done, or whatever to manipulate, or whatever it is. It's just this automatic, like, oh, you dislike And it's not like you dislike white people, it's just the action, right? It's like, this is what has been done, therefore you make a logical, response to that. But I think it's very important that this was implemented in the book and very clear and straightforward.
Any more comments, insight, anything, highlight anything from this section you want to share? Questions?
One other thing that I wanted to share too, on page 87 about dislocation, I think it's, from what I read out of there, it's very important that we are all, like, non-white people are like ready in a sense to be dislocated at any moment in their life. So that's something I just wanted to bring up, and I thought was very interesting or important when I was reading it.
Yeah, actually, someone who's watching on our YouTube, Transcendent One, said that he literally mentioned, yes, Neely Fuller stated that due to the system of racism and white supremacy, one may have to move quickly and often. It's really funny that you guys both mentioned that. But yeah, I'm sure. Well, me personally, I've had to move, been displaced multiple times. I'm sure a lot of people in this Zoom call probably share that experience, or maybe alone in that. I don't know, but happens to a lot of Black people and will always happen as long as this system is on the planet.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add was on page 92, when he talks about not bragging about your ancestors, and it says, when asked to tell about what your ancestors invented, say, my ancestors invented breathing, or my ancestors invented me, and I was invented to solve problems as they are presented to me. And I really like that part so much, because I think sometimes non-white people, especially Black people, try to like prove themselves to white people. Like, our ancestors did this, or our ancestors created this. And it's like, who cares? Like, right now we're existing under white supremacy. And like, when you try to brag about your ancestors, all you're doing is showing that white supremacists that you still want them to approve of you. You still want them to think you're worthy. So I thought that that was a really good answer, and I'm definitely going to try and implement that, because I've heard that many times. Like, what have your ancestors done? Or like, when people try to talk about Black people being worthless.
Agreed. I also really enjoyed this part from 99.
Oh, sorry, so before you move on, I was trying to comment on Ash, what Ash was saying. I totally agree with her. I feel that a lot of unconstructive energy and time is wasted on trying to prove how great your ancestors were, who your ancestors were. I remember I was watching this show, and it was just Neely Fuller listening to the show, and he said, everybody should try to be problem solvers. Like, so I feel that, like, I would like to, if I can, teach my offspring to reply, like, what do you want to be when you want to grow up? I want to be a problem solver. That's what, if somebody asks me what I want my career to be, I want to be a problem solver. I'm going to try and, use that more often, codify that.
Well said. I want to read this from 99. It says, do not worry about death being final or not final. Instead, do something of constructive value with each time and space that you have been given. Think, speak, and act as if everything that you have access to, including yourself, as being a gift that should be used at all times to accomplish a constructive purpose. Do this until you are too weak in mind and body to continue. and do this until the actual moment of death as you proceed to your last moment of existence. Try to tell others what you have learned that may be of constructive value. Think of your going into non-existence as being acceptable as you're coming into existence, particularly if all is done naturally. So I think this is excellent. I think a lot of people are trained to fear death and to try to avoid it. And I also think we don't appreciate our time. We don't appreciate our bodies and our access to our time. Um, and I think this is just a great segment. I'm sure those who read this portion will agree. So
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Neely Fuller definitely has a way with words. Such a simple way, a philosophical way. It's simple and it's reality. You know, people, we should all, myself, I need to take, more time to enjoy the fact that I'm alive. Unfortunately, it's under the system of racism and white supremacy, but the white supremacists cannot, entirely control that. They can control what I'm given and and they can try to control what I do with those things. But really taking the time to enjoy, people's times, enjoying things through the senses. I think that's often overlooked and is honestly probably why, the world is in such disarray, why people are so depressed can be an explanation for myself.
I think this is why. I think this is how Neely Fuller is still alive today, because he's still attempting to produce justice, and he still practices this part of the code. And I think this is like life saving advice, life saving information. Um, and that's all I have. I'm ready to go into closing comments, and no one has any other comments or anything. Does anyone want to start the closing comments?
Let's see.
I'd like to
Okay.
thank everybody for, I'm sorry?
I start talking at the same time. Go ahead.
No, you, please.
Oh, no, it's fine. Where was that? Okay. As far as the chapter, I found it interesting where it said to try to operate some type of constructive business activity at the same place that you have your place of residence, and the comment that was made earlier about the fees for that. I didn't know that. Otherwise, I think that all of the information was constructive. I feel like I do, especially nowadays, relate with the dislocation. I always feel like I'm gonna have to be ready to pick up and move. And I feel like I'm like kind of not buying as much, not, I would like nothing I don't need, just more kind of necessities, because I feel like with the current system that anything could happen. And that's it.
I'd like to thank everyone for a constructive conversation.
For me, I just wanted to end with, do not under any circumstance rob, steal, belittle, or tell lies to anyone to get any of the things that you want or need. I thank you this was a great conversation. Economics definitely showed me a lot, taught me a lot, and clarified a lot for me. And I will be actively trying to practice this in my life every day for the rest of my life.
From this area of economics, just to close out the entire thing, is that from what I've learned or from what I've read is that it's important to use my time and energy in ways of constructive value, but also one of the things I want to do and for myself is to try to use my time and energy studying, try to tell others what I have learned that may be of constructive value in general or to them, especially when they come to me in need or when they come to me for some sort of quote unquote advice. I think it's important that I have a response that is of constructive value. And another thing too is that I hope with my time and energy that I can start a business. And that's it. Thank you for this conversation.
For me, I was a bit late and I did not want to be too repetitive. I will say that the biggest thing I did take away from the recent pages came from the dislocation section. It didn't have much to do with dislocation, but I'll read it. It says, it's the last sentence. It says about dislocation. They do this to help keep the non-white people stressed, confused, and out of balance in every area of activity. And the thing that really stood out for me was out of balance. And as of recently, I have been trying to learn more about spirituality and chakras. And when you do, most of the information I did receive talks about being out of balance and being your lower self, not being able to reach your higher self. So for me, this section really pointed something out that definitely is of constructive value and something that I will definitely be looking more into and adding to my life. But as far as economics goes, the chapter was very, very informative. Lots of things to take away. And the truth really hurts, for anybody really reading out there. I was, I tried to justify a lot of things while I was reading this, about especially hanging out with people, I guess. What is the constructive purpose? I definitely laughed during that part. And I even made the comment that Neely Fuller is probably really fun at parties, but of course he does not party. And, I definitely will not be partying either. But we'll see. But yeah, shout out to Neely Fuller Jr. once again.
I'll go next on the vein of like what Quaker Drummo was doing. I want to read from page 99 at the bottom. It's actually the last part of the economics. It says, choose to have your constructive work be your so-called monument, memorial, and or funeral ceremony, rather than have an expensive or burdensome funeral or burial ceremony. Choose to have money and energy spent on some constructive product that you would have been trying to produce if you had continued to exist. And I just really liked that part. I thought that was like really poignant and it really rang true to me because I think it's like a way to be constructive even when you're no longer here. And I just thought it was like a really interesting way to end the area section. Overall, I think I learned a whole lot and it's a lot to like apply, but I'm hoping that I can apply the things that resonate with me.
All right, and then I'll go. Thank you guys for the conversation and bearing with me while trying to communicate codified concepts that are in my brain computer. With the one part where Mr. Fuller describes Black culture as pitiful, primitive, stupid, and silly. I think if you just went and mentioned that to some other victims without like having this book in hand, you might get name called a certain COON word for saying that. And then on page 94, at the bottom of the page, there is a thing or a note regarding managing your hair. And without calling out any victims, there's a non-white Black female that is being racially showcased in regards to that code. And that's all I got.
Can you read that part you're talking about, if possible?
Okay, it's on page 94. It's at the very bottom. It's in bold. Do not use too much time and energy managing your hair. Keep your hair in a condition and or at a length that is easy to maintain and groom, arranged in a manner that attracts a minimum amount of attention from others. Explanation. It is incorrect to use or present hair, body ornaments, etc. in such a manner as to attract attention away from thought, speech, and or action that is of more constructive value. Avoid doing anything to your hair that is likely to attract attention to or to promote unnecessary reaction to the sight of your hair. Avoid using your hair as a source of entertainment for the general public or for the purpose of displaying it as a theater for focused observation, consternation, curiosity, amusement, or disgust. And again, that reminded me of that one headline, and it's on page 94 again.
Well, thanks for mentioning that, because I also wanted to comment on that, because and it reminded me of how it's no coincidence that like there's a bunch of so-called Black hair salons where like Black females and countersexual males and females sometimes go and spend large amounts of money getting their hair done by other non-white and Black people. And this in no way, shape, or form like supports producing justice. And this is like very similar to like getting long nails, which also is an aspect of ghetto glorification or promoting white supremacy. But it's no coincidence. Black people are trained to want to have like really, really nifty, cool so-called hairstyles and just want to look extravagant. Black people are trained to want to show off and attention seek, and this is how that behavior manifests. So thanks for mentioning that, Dan. Does anyone else want to add their closing comment?
I just wanted to add to that too. Like a lot of times Black people will try to justify doing those type of things because it's like it goes back to our African traditions. Like they try to do that with twerking as well. And it's just like a cop out because it's like you have no other connections to whatever so-called African traditions. You know, they say like, oh, like that's how like we showing our hair was a way of like showing our pride and stuff. But it's like you can't just pick and choose what type of African traditions you want to use to benefit whatever you're doing, which is only benefiting white supremacy.
Thank you. For me, for my closing comment, it's just gonna be. This is from page 406, and it says a system of white supremacy has proven to be the most powerful system in the known universe for getting things done, but the cost is too high. It requires the killing and other mistreatment of non-white people. The system of justice balance between people would be better and best. All victims of white supremacy are functional children, and all of the white people who practice white supremacy are their illegitimate parents.